Hello, this week we are starting a new mini-series in Ephesians chapter 4 from verses 17 to 24. So today I'm just going to begin with the first two verses. So I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They're darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. So the book of Ephesians, written by Paul to the church in Ephesus. So it's written to believers who are non-Jews, who are Gentiles. So believers who haven't grown up in the faith in the scriptures, but have discovered this Jesus to be true and have placed their trust in him. And Paul kind of characterizes this book by challenging them to live differently. He says, once you lived in darkness, now you live in light. Once you were enemies of God, now you are friends of God. And therefore, as friends of God, you are to live differently from the culture around you. So Paul, at the start, he says, I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord. And he really pulls no punches when describing what this culture is like. He says that the non-believers were futile in their thinking, darkened in their understanding, separated from the life that is in God, that they're hard-hearted and that they're ignorant. So he's setting this culture up as something which is completely alien to the way that the believers should be living. And we might recognise some of that in our own culture. When we as a nation, when we turn away from God, when any culture, society turns away from God, this mindset can creep in. The definition of futility is pointlessness, uselessness, hopelessly confused. How often can we see that when we look around in the news today? When we look at people's lives, we can see it's easy to lack direction and purpose. Jesus, when looking at the crowds, had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Now, I know of lots of non-believers who are far, far better people than I am. That they are kinder, that they are certainly more patient, that they're more generous. But thankfully, I'm not as I once was. Thankfully, by God's grace at work in my life, I'm being transformed more into who he made me to be. And part of that is a shift in mindset, that as believers, we don't live in futility. We don't live pointless lives, but we live with our eyes set on Jesus because he has made us for a purpose. We believe that we are here on the planet, not by chance, not by accident, but because he's purposed and created us. And I think when we think about no longer living as we once did, that can be a real challenge. And I think back to maybe when I was about 16 and just beginning to own my faith for myself, to have come to know Jesus and the impact that was having. And I remember working at the local boatyards. Me and a load of mates were there having a summer job of cleaning the outside of boats. And we had a kind of unwritten agreement that whoever turned up first would clock us all in. So we'd be getting paid from that point. And whichever of us was last to leave would clock us all out, so that we'd be getting paid for the maximum amount of time in the day. And I just remember being really challenged by God that actually this wasn't right. Even though this was what all my mates were doing and I'd been going along with it before, that actually I needed to change and to turn away from that behaviour and to kind of be honest and to have integrity in that situation and to say that I no longer was prepared to do that. And that's just one small example in my life of what it looks to no longer live as we once did in futile thinking, no longer to live in darkness, but to live in light. This week in my own devotions, I've been reading through Romans chapter 12 and just focusing in on verse 2, which says, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And, that when we become a Christian, we're not instantly transformed so that we don't make any more bad decisions. We're not instantly transformed in all of our thoughts and attitudes, but actually all of us are a work in progress. So let's choose today to leave behind those things where we once were and to allow God to conform us more into his will and the way in which he wants us to live.